So we are now in public session. I just want to read a correction to the record. The University of Limerick academics who appeared before the committee on Wednesday, the 19th of June, have requested the following correction to the record of yesterday's proceeding, which I will now read into the public record. At yesterday's committee meeting with AIR, it was stated that the UL academics who attended the previous meeting may have said that the standard of AIR's fibre cable was not of the same standard as the fibre that would be overlaid by the preferred bidder in the 300,000 premises exclusion zone. The UL academics did not state that AIR's fibre was inferior to NBI's fibre at any stage. So we'll now move on to today's meeting in relation to the National Broadband Plan, and I would like to welcome Mr Dennis O'Leary, Head of Strategy and Innovation, and Mr Michael Mahan, former NBP Project Manager from ESB, to the meeting to discuss the National Broadband Plan. Before we begin, I wish to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect to their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the Chairman to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise or make charges against any person, persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or her or it identifiable. I also wish to advise you that any submission or opening statements that you made to the committee will be published on the committee website after this meeting. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official, either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. And just remind members to turn off your mobile phones or to put them onto flight mode. So I'll now invite Mr O'Leary to give your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good afternoon, Deputies. As well as the two-page statement that we circulated earlier, we also circulated a short presentation on ESB's involvement in the National Broadband Plan, and also a little bit initially on ESB's involvement in the telecom industry in Ireland generally, the establishment of CSIRO, or delivery vehicle as such, and the introduction to the broadband plan and the timelines that were key to that, the commercial challenges and the key decisions that led to our withdrawal from this process over 2 years ago, and some summary kind of conclusions. So, first of all, we got involved in the telecoms business back in 2003, where we ran fibre on the overhead transmission network, and we ran a northern ring which covered north of Leinster and a T up into County Donegal, and there was a southern ring then which covered most of South Leinster and a lot of South Munster. And that was a backhaul network, which basically means it was like a motorway network, and all the big retail companies like Air and ENET and Virgin and BT would have been customers of that network since around 2003. So the second diagram just shows the lower voltages, the 40,000 volt or the 38,000 volt network, which we have about 700 stations all over the country. So you could take it that any town in Ireland with a population of probably greater than 3,000 or 4,000 people has one of those stations in their town. And the diagram in your right then represents the medium voltage system, the 10,000 and 20,000 volt system, which ultimately brings electricity to every home in the country, and of which we have about 90,000 kilometres of that network. So we had this idea, as well as being just the provider of the backhaul network, that utilising the electricity network in a larger scale gave us the opportunity of more commercial opportunities in the telecoms business. We looked at it in a lot more detail in 2014, because then the European Union produced the digital agenda for Europe, and it was the first time that the whole issue of the replacement of the historical copper networks with a new type of high-speed broadband network is what would be required in the more modern economies in terms of delivering the speeds, both the uptake speeds and the download speeds, that residential customers as well as commercial and industrial customers would work into the future. And Ireland at the time was lagging behind the European average, both in terms of the take-up rates, both in terms of the availability, and also in terms of the speeds that were available in Ireland to customers at that time. So we decided there was an opportunity there, but we had to make a decision as a company, at what level would we get involved in this business? On one hand, we could simply lease out the electricity network to a telecom operator, and on the other extreme, we could become end-to-end. We could do the infrastructure, we could do the wholesale, and we could do the retail. We discounted both of those extremes as such, and we landed in a position that we would become an infrastructure company, and we would do it in a joint venture with another telecoms company. The reason for that thinking was that, well, we didn't have a real telecom experience in the mass telecoms market, and we didn't know enough about telecoms pricing, and we didn't know enough about the telecoms industry as such. So at that point, we went into a fairly extensive procurement process that lasted well over 12 months, and at the end of it, the Vodafone were the preferred candidate, and they joined up with ESB then to form this new company called Cyro. The structure of Cyro is that you have a joint venture agreement between the two main shareholders, which are ESB and Vodafone, and that joint venture creation then is the company Cyro. And Cyro then has a separate agreement with ESB Networks. It's called the Network Access Agreement with ESB Networks. And that gives the terms and the conditions that Cyro must abide by in order to access the electricity network to string the fibre on the network. And that company has been set up now in 2016, and is probably going at a fairly optimum speed now since mid-16 or maybe start of 2017. And since then it has passed nearly 250,000 homes with broadband network, 242,000 homes. We've connected over 42,000 customers. The target for the business plan for Cyro, this phase of the business plan is funded by board shareholders, is to pass 450,000 homes. It represents an investment of not far off 500 million euros in the telecoms infrastructure business in Ireland. We were the first retailer to offer a gigabit service, a 500 megabit and a gigabit service to the residential sector. We consider the company to be best in class in terms of service delivery, and there are over 10, 12, nearly 14 retailers operating on the Cyro networks at this time. So we think it has been a tremendous success. The phase one concentrated on the 50 towns outside of the main cities, particularly outside of Dublin. And once that's completed, then the shareholders will sit down and discuss what options there are for a phase two. But to date, the business has been very successful and has met the key kind of metrics that would have been set in terms of a formal business plan. Then there came the talk of the National Broadband Plan, and I introduced a diagram there of Ireland, and you can see the comparators. What's in blue in the diagram there is what is not in the intervention area, and what is in the light brown and the orange colours as the area and the premises that are in the intervention area. So those 757,000 homes are in the two coloured areas. The different colours just represent the fact that initially there was going to be two lots. So if you compare Cyro's challenge with the challenge of developing and rolling out a national broadband plan, Cyro's plan was for 450,000 homes. The national broadband plan was 757,000 homes. Cyro would intend rolling out about 1,300 kilometres of fibre, and the national broadband plan, from our technical design, would have required nearly 77,000 kilometres of fibre. That's an extraordinary structural engineering challenge, a project management challenge as such. And you can see the piece that would be required underground was quite minuscule in the national broadband plan. So that was the challenge that was there with, and the reason that a national broadband plan was put in place by the state was that it wasn't going to be commercial for any of the key operators to go into these rural locations and roll out fibre on the hope that the customer take-up and the revenue from those customers would generate an adequate return on that investment over 20 or 25 years or whatever. So some type of stimulus was needed. The next diagram just shows the kind of complexity of doing this work. While it is just over a 500,000 or 700 and 57,000 homes. To do it the way that we had proposed in doing it, or were going to do it, just from the technical design, would have involved very close to 600 kind of mini exchanges around the country. And these would have been based in our 38 kV substations and in our medium voltage substations. But that was the level of network design that was required to ensure that the required broadband speeds that were set down by the department in the tender documentations could be met basically for every single household on the island as such. And that would have required, as I said, a very extensive amount of fibre in the intervention area. In terms of the key timelines, as I said, CIRA was formed in 2014. Mid-2014 to 2015, there was a lot of discussion with the department on the strategy and the mapping for the NBP. A lot of it was on technical issues, and a lot of it was on the number of houses and the accuracy of the mapping in the intervention area. In mid-2015, there was a draft strategy, and then in December 2015, the DCCAE published the revised strategy and the updated map, and they commenced the procurement process. And as I say, most of the emphasis at time was on the technical and the mapping piece, and not that much on the commercial contract as such. In Q1 and Q2 of 2016, we prepared detailed pre-qualification submission, and they were that you had the financial support of your parents, the ability to build, the ability to operate, the ability to manage large-scale networks, something and such things. And in June 2016, the DCCAE pre-qualified the bidders and they progressed to the formal procurement process. And this is the first time, really, that we got sight of the commercial contract and the conditions of the commercial contract associated with the NBP project. In December 2016, the DCCAE advised bidders that there could be 300,000 premises removed from the contract due to a commitment by AIR that they now would do those homes or those premises on a commercial basis, i.e. that there would be no need for any subvention or any state funding for those 300,000 houses. And that obviously had an impact on the business case that we had been working on, both from a technical point of view and also in the business case from the point of view of the potential revenues that could have been generated from the original subvention area to what would be a revised subvention area minus those 300,000 homes. Nevertheless, we asked for additional time from the department to redo the technical design again, because we had to go back to scratch, even though just 300,000 homes, and I can explain later the impact of that 300,000 and how it actually impacted on the business case. And as we were progressing at that stage, following the withdrawal of the 300,000, and also with certain challenges we had with the construct of the commercial contract associated with the NBP, we met with the department on a number of occasions, and in September 2017, following more urgent meetings, where we asked them specifically to consider certain requests that we would have had that would have made the possibility of making a kind of commercial business case less challenging than what it was. Now, while they did move on some issues and tried to help us on other issues, at the end it wasn't enough. And following 2 years of a fairly intensive period of involvement by a not insignificant number of staff and outside help in ESB, a decision was taken by board shareholders from Sligo that this wasn't going to fit with what they had hoped, and we advised the department that we're formally withdrawing from the process in September 2017. Specifically, if you look at the commercial challenges associated with a significant infrastructure job like a national broadband plan, it can be broken down into 4 parts. On one side of the page, or above the line, there are the costs. There's the cost to build the network. And it is very extensive, because 80,000 kilometres, I was reminded at the start by one of the guys working on the project, he said there's roughly twice around the world is the length of fibre that's required to to serve all the homes in rural Ireland. But that's a one-off cost, and that's a cost you have to manage. The second cost you have to consider is the day-to-day cost of managing that level of telecommunications equipment, managing the maintenance of the equipment, managing all the fault repairs, the IT systems, the billing systems, everything that's required. So all those costs are on one side. And to match those, then you have the amount of revenue you're going to get from each customer, and most critically, the number of customers that are going to connect on to the system. And there was a point when the number of customers was in the region of 800,000 that you could say we would have been quite positive towards the whole business. But when the 300,000 was removed, it had a very serious impact on the potential and the projected revenues that we would see out over 10, 20 or 30 years in the project, and that's what made it really challenging. So there was a number of issues. There was the removal of the 300,000 premises. There was the risk apportionment within the structure of the contract itself. There was the financeability of the contract simply due to the risk apportionment within the contract. There were also issues about the use of alternate networks, which we can discuss in a minute, and also the rebalancing risk. So all in all, they were the key decisions or the key kind of issues that forced CSIRO and forced the shareholders of CSIRO to withdraw from the NBP when it did about 2 years ago. When we entered this project in 2015, we entered it with high expectations and we entered it in very good faith. We put together a really good team of people to get into a level of detail on this project that a lot of people at Senior 11 in ESB and Vodafone were astounded by the level of detail we actually had to get into to get the design right, and it was Michael and his team did all of that work here. When the intervention area was reduced by 300,000, this did have a material impact on the project. And throughout 2017, following that, we were really challenged as a business in terms of making a business plan that would follow the kind of hold rates or meet the kind of financial criteria set by board shareholders. In Q3, following significant engagement with the department, we were left with no choice but to withdraw from the NBP. And since then, ESB has moved on. It's been 2 years since anybody in ESB or anybody in Vodafone has worked on the broadband plan. It's amazing what happens within 2 years. And within ESB, our focus now is totally on delivery of our Brighter Future strategy and working with the government and supporting the government in the implementation of its recently announced climate action plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Leary. I might start with just a question arising from our meeting yesterday with AIR. They stated that they could design, build, operate and upgrade the poles and ducts and pay VAT for €1 billion for the rollout of the National Broadband Plan, and that's in contrast to their final draft bid of €2.75 billion, which didn't include VAT. In your view, is that credible? Is that something that the ESB could do to come in under €1 billion?
As I said in my presentation, it's 2 years since we left this process, and I know from reading the media and other things that the process has changed a bit in that intervening 2 years. It has changed in terms of the subsidy a bit, it has changed in terms of the actual size of the intervention area, it has changed in terms of some of the kind of commercial issues that were in the contract. So what we were working on 2 years ago is different to what my understanding is there now. I'm loath to comment on the bids of either the two companies that may bid, because I don't know what we're talking about here in terms of project delivery. There seems to be a bit of confusion. Are we talking about the total project? Are we talking about the main fibre running along the side of the road? Are we talking about the fibre along the side of the road plus the electronics, plus all the kind of equipment that would be needed to run this fibre? Are we talking about all the maintenance costs? Are we talking about the service costs, the drop cost to all of these customers? So I don't actually know what is in the billion euros that was there in terms of the kind of figures that were quoted yesterday. Secondly, you asked, could ESB or CSIRO deliver this project with a subsidy of €1 billion? And from the work that we did and where we were in 2017, the answer to that is no. ESB would not have been able to deliver the NBP project for a subsidy of €1 billion.
And just, there's a lot of public commentary, and I'm sure you heard it as well, in going back a few months, that the ESB could roll this out. We could use the ESB poles right across the country to roll out the National Broadband Plan. Could you just talk to us a little bit how you would place fibre and any of the challenges, if there are any, in placing fibre along electricity wires across the country, and maybe talk about the impact of that? Because as you know, that ESB, there's a narrative out there that the ESB could roll this out right across the country.
Well, ESB has a national infrastructure, a nationwide infrastructure. We have a connection, and we probably have a piece of equipment in most fields in the country. AIR have a similar national infrastructure, except their infrastructure is predominantly along the roadside, but they have a national infrastructure too. You can run fibre on the ESB electricity infrastructure. And before we signed the joint venture with CSIRO and allowed CSIRO to roll out fibre on the ESB infrastructure, we did intensive testing of this fibre network in our main test centre in Portlaoise. We also built a number of test facilities in different parts of the country, and we tested that network under the most extreme conditions in terms of storm loading, in terms of wind loading, and in terms of ice loading. And we then developed a set of criteria and a set of standards that would have to apply and would be applied by the local ESB networks management team to any company that wanted to run fibre on the ESB infrastructure, that's namely CSIRO. So we would be confident in the ability of the electricity infrastructure to hold the fibre network, if the standards are applied, without any risk to the key purpose of the electricity infrastructure, which is the delivery of a reliable supply of electricity to all customers, because that's the one thing we wouldn't want to undermine in any way. So we would have done that work, and we would be confident on that work. That's one point. The second point is, it's not easy running fibre on the electricity into network, because of the fact that you have electricity on the infrastructure. And in the vast majority of cases, that network has to be disconnected and earthed before you would allow any work to start in stringing the fibre. But it can be done, and it is possible, and it is possible to be done with due regard to the electricity infrastructure.
So if there was a repair work on the broadband fibre, that there would have to be there could have to be an outage in electricity, that would have to, there would be an outage in the electricity in order to repair the fibre. Am I correct?
Not necessarily, but it might have to happen. But I can say, for our experience in CSIRO, where we have rolled out an extensive amount of fibre, that the fault level on the fibre network is tiny. It's really, really robust infrastructure.
And just briefly, because I'm also chairperson of the Special Committee on Climate Action, and you made reference to, I suppose, your new focus now, ESB. I know that you're rolling out charging points right across the country. What kind of capital investment plans have you in place now to invest? As you know, we have set a target for 70% renewable electricity generation by the year 2030. And just how would that coincide if you had also gone into the National Broadband Plan network also? Just first of all, your capital plans and how that would have worked with rolling out a National Broadband Plan as well.
It's a very interesting question. If you look at the challenges that ESB faces up to 2030, it's not just the 70% of renewable generation. There's also talk that we might have to connect over 500,000 new homes in that period. In the Climate Action Fund that was launched last week by the government, there's talk of retrofitting up to 400,000 homes in the same period and providing the charging infrastructure for 300,000 electric vehicles. You're all aware from reading the media the challenges we face in just delivering the supply to the number of data centres that are trying to locate in this country. And given the very strong inflow into the country of FDI investment, the one thing we notice is the degree of the electricity service, both in the speed of the service and the quantity of the service, is increasing as we go along. And they're just the issues in relation to delivering our key strategy, A Brighter Future, and also supporting the government's piece. Alongside with that, ESB is just getting ready to submit its PR5 submission to the regulator, which is the key networks work programmes up until 2025. So in terms of our work programme looking forward, like ESB, you could say we have a full book at the present time. And in terms of funding, like we're kind of at kind of limits in relation to funding there as well. So if we were to undertake the National Broadband Plan, there would have to be a discussion on what plans would have to be deferred or what elements of what would have to be deferred, because it would be really difficult to deliver everything that's on the books at the present time and to also deliver the National Broadband Plan. And the issue of the funding would also have to be dealt with. But as I say, ESB have pulled out of this, not pulled out, but we've withdrawn from this process over 2 years now. We haven't done any work in this process over 2 years, and things have moved on. So we consider that to be a kind of a situation, a hypothetical situation, to be honest, at the present.
Thank you very much. I'll move on to Deputy Timmy Dooley.
Thanks very much, Chairman. And Mr. Leader, thanks very much for a very thorough presentation, a comprehensive presentation, and kind of wouldn't expect anything less from you in terms of your reputation. Just, you deliver electricity to every home in the country under a mandate by the state that's regulated by the regulator. So if the state were minded to mandate you in the morning to deliver broadband to the 542,000 premises, it's clearly something that, notwithstanding the issues that it would be, it's something that, as a semi-state company, you'd have to do. Is that correct?
Well, this would have to be done under a kind of a state aid clearance or a state aid subvention. As I said to the Cahill, look, we have withdrawn from this process now in the past 2 years and have been working on all the other key programmes that I have mentioned, and have kind of, by the National Broadband Plan in a way has kind of passed us by. But if there was that position, and my understanding of state aid, without being an expert in it now, is there would be a challenge in getting to that position. But if that was the position, and if we were mandated as a company, well, we would have to seriously consider that, yes, at that stage, yes.
Okay, that's fair enough. Now, just on a couple of other things, you talked about the issues to and fro with the department about the NBP process, and you're well aware what AIR have said about it being cumbersome and complex and difficult. If you were asked in a relatively simplistic way to say how you would structure the delivery, this is back now, go back the 2 years to when you were in the thick of this, how you would deliver high-speed broadband commensurate with what you were doing in the CSIRO areas, that same level of broadband to the 542,000 homes, would you have done it in the same way as the NBP process talked about doing? What I'm trying to get to here, Mr. O'Leary, is yesterday AIR told us that they have 300,000 homes connected to high-speed broadband in what they refer to as the 300k intervention area. And they said that if they used the same model, the same criteria, the same standards, they could do the 542,000 for $1 billion or less. They said that the difference between the billion and where the 3 billion was in terms of the complexity that was introduced, the inability to use their existing infrastructure, the necessity to establish an entirely new wholesale operation, the necessity to give a different service level of agreement to customers. So, to the sort of uninitiated on this side of the room, myself, it seemed to me that the process undertaken by the department was overly complex and was aimed at creating a level playing pitch for everybody in terms of how they might compete rather than getting best value for money. So we had the purpose of creating a level playing pitch so that anyone could come in, whether or not they had infrastructure. Would you have any comments on that, not in relation to AIR, but how it might relate to yourselves?
Well, if we just take the question in relation to the project itself, In my opening remarks, I tried to give some type of an impression of the complexity of this project. Having been involved in the rollout of infrastructure with ESB now for many years, it is an enormous project to roll out 80,000 kilometres of high-speed broadband in the most remotest locations in the country, where road access is poor, where the terrain is poor, where the ground is poor, where connectivity is poor. It's just really difficult. And if you're doing a project like that, you just could say, well, we'll do all of West Cork then, and then we'll move on and we'll do all of North Kerry. And like you wouldn't, you'd have to start probably in all 26 counties at the one time and bring the whole lot together. So that adds to the complexity of it. And it's only when you're in the process that you really see that when you look at the contracts and the documentation, how detailed they have to be. Like, there are so many issues to be covered off. It is true we had our disputes and disagreements with the department. But on the one hand, we were the bidder looking to get it our way. And on the other hand, you were the department who were the people deciding on the contract, who approached this, it would appear to me, from the point of view in ensuring that the maximum risk lay with the bidders and that the minimum risk lay with the state, and that the state was kind of covered in all eventualities. And in doing that, they crossed all the I's and they crossed all their T's, and from our position they probably crossed too many I's and too many T's, and that would have been our concern. But we never disagree with the department on the understanding of why they actually took that approach to the approach they actually took.
So then could I ask you, Mr. Leahy, so in terms of minimum risk to department or state, maximum risk to the bidder, if you look at what's now proposed, and again, I don't want you to comment necessarily on Granahan McCourt, but if you were to know the outcome, that there was 2.9, 2.7 billion, 2.8 billion, 2.9 billion available from the state, and you were to know that the ESB as a parent company would only have to commit 220 million of capital, some of that working capital, 170 million of real capital and 30 million or 40 million of venture. Do you think it would have been a proposition worth pursuing?
No, that's really difficult, to, again, Deputy Dooley, from the point of view is that the time intervention has passed. It's a different proposition now to what it was when we left. I don't have any insight or any detail in relation to what the MBP core was, except what I've read in the paper. I'm not so sure how accurate that is. So, much in the same way as I'm very slow to comment on any of the statements by areas, I'm also very slow to comment on anything in relation to the bid that was put in by the NBP Corp preferred bidder at the present.
Yeah, I don't want to push it, but I need to get a kind of a sense in terms of the quantum of money. If we leave Ayr and Granahan McCourt completely out of it, is it fair to assume that when you withdrew, that you didn't feel that there was that level of subvention available?
I think that would be a fair comment, but I will make one other comment here regarding the subsidy issue. I think at times there is often an overemphasis on the subsidy issue on what was a gap-funded model,
yes,
as was this project here. Like, the theory here is that the bidders submit the costs of delivering the project and running the infrastructure, and the subsidy then is to plug the gap between that and what would make a regulated return. And it wasn't intended that if you put in an extremely high subsidy you were going to make extremely high returns, because there was mechanisms in the contract that if that happened, there was a clawback mechanism in the contract by the state. Unfortunately, if you made far lesser returns or far inferior returns, there wasn't any mechanism in the contract to support the bidders. That risk all they limit the bidder at that particular time. So that's just one issue, I would say, in relation to the discussions that have been taking place regarding the subsidy.
And just further on the risk, and understanding and recognising that the ESB is populated with highly qualified engineers, you're pretty adept at assessing risk. and I mean the same could be said of Air in terms of the people that they have in a technical capacity. It's clear from, and I just want clarity on this, it's clear from, to me anyway, what you're saying is this is an enormous project. There is an enormous level and a multiplicity of risk out there. And based on your very considerable experience about, you know, string and cable, rolling out fibre, rolling out high voltage lines, you recognise that at an early stage. And as such, the risk was too great for the return on investment or the potential reward which, you know, your board would look at versus the investment that they would make. So I think we'd have to be able to draw our own inferences from that too, that a company like yourselves with the fine track record that you have in what you do didn't believe it was doable for the monies that were available, or that certainly the return was questionable in terms of what you might achieve. And it goes to a point that have had real concerns about for a long time, how a private investment firm from Boston with a list of subcontractors without the level of expertise in the marketplace, the level of experience, or indeed the level of understanding of the complexity of it, could continue with this process all the way to the point which they did. But again, I don't expect you to comment on that, because that would be it's merely a comment. I think you've clarified for me on the costing. Yes, you talk about the removal of the 300,000 of what might be considered, has been used by others as cherry picking by Air. They were entitled to do that, and the state had no choice but to remove it from the intervention area, because once the offer to roll it out commercially under state aid rules, the state couldn't be seen to subvent that. So it was a game changer for you, but the department had no issue on it. Having rolled out fibre into that area, is it fair to assume that it gave Air, it makes it easier for Air to rock up now and offer to do it for $1 billion, because there's a good chunk of the groundwork covered for them? Now, you could say that's their good luck, but the truth of it is a significant advantage to Air, and probably helps to explain how their costs are lesser than what anyone else's might be in that position.
Yes, it would, and I think I'll deal with the Air 300,000 now, if I may. At the very end of the presentation, there was one slide, just an appendix. I don't know if the deputies have that. Sorry? It was Mitchelstown. Sorry? It was Mitchelstown. Oh, yeah, that's the one, yeah.
Take a Cartman to watch the charity, right?
Well spotted.
Well, this is Mitchelstown, and what has happened in Mitchelstown is what has happened in every other town in the country. And what's red there represents the main roads out of Mitchelstown. And the piece in the middle is Mitchelstown itself. So all the houses in the middle already have high-speed broadband through fibre to the cabinet or fibre to the exchange or whatever. So they are not in the intervention area. And while we had 775,000 homes, all the homes in the red lines were in the subvention area. But what Air did in terms of the 300,000 is all the homes in the red have now been taken out of the intervention area by Air, and are now done on a commercial basis by Air in terms of their 300,000. Our equipment is inside Mitchelstown. So if we have to get to the homes in the intervention area, we must now go through all the red areas without fibre, but we can't pick up any customers because they're no longer in the intervention area. So in effect, Air have put a donut around each town, and we have our equipment in the middle of the donut, and all our customers are on the other side of the donut. So we have to go through the donut in every case to get to the intervention customers. Now, I just want to be careful here. I am not accusing Air of anything here. What Air did was a commercial decision to take 300,000 customers out of the intervention area and say that they would do them on a commercial basis. And from our understanding, that was perfectly right. There was nothing anybody could do really to stop 300,000 people getting high-speed broadband that didn't have it before. The only thing for us is we had done 12 months or 14 months of very hard work in doing a really good technical design and a really good case and everything, and to find that, oh well, we kind of have to start again. And that was the reality of it. But that is in effect the impact of the 300,000. But
the net result, and I'll conclude on this point, so that was the battles that exist between, it's called commercial tension, and you've rightly identified and said 300,000 benefit, they have their broadband, makes it more difficult for us, so, you know, a little bit like the television programme, we're out, and you were out. But the truth of it is, by Eir's investment, and I don't carry any flag for Eir, by their investment there on a commercial basis, it puts them in a much stronger position to offer a better deal to the state in terms of the level of subvention required now to get to the 540. So in essence, it shouldn't be a surprise perhaps to any of us, but maybe it was yesterday, that Eir were in a position to deliver against what the government required of them, or required for the citizens in that location, at a lesser cost to the taxpayer.
That is true. That would be our understanding as well. But there's one important point here, Deputy Dooley. Following the decision by Eir on the 300,000, one of the issues we raised by the department was that very issue that you have highlighted there. The fact that we were at a serious disadvantage, or Sire were at a serious disadvantage, in having to get infrastructure through the donut before we could start picking up the customers in the reduced intervention area. And we had discussions with Eir, and we had discussions with Comreg, and we had discussions with the department, because we felt we should have access to the Eir infrastructure in the donut at incremental cost.
Yes.
So that we would be competing in the intervention area, if you like, on the same footing. But we had a lot of difficulty on that particular issue when I remember now, Michael could help me, it was back in the summer of 2017, both with Eir and with Comreg and with the department, and it was not getting any closer to a resolution, and it came at a point in time that the clock was running down under pressure from the department, and we still had all these commercial issues, so that also would have been a factor in the reason that we withdrew.
That's very helpful, Mr. Leary. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Deputy Ryan.
I have to go up for a topical question, so, and I would have to leave shortly later on as well. Just to tease that out further, so you were looking still, even after the 300,000, now 340,000 houses were removed for the intervention area, you were still looking at the possibility of connecting from the end point, as it were, of those red areas on the outskirts of Mitchelstown, where you would just pay, I suppose, be a regulated, in a sense, cost for what for if you had provided the fibre on the same red routes through the donut, you would still be able to maybe hook on at the end point of that and continue the network from there. But you said that the department wasn't able to agree that in the end, or Comreg, or what were their concerns about that?
Well, it wasn't that they weren't able to agree, or it wasn't that they did have a concern, but we never got an answer, or we never got a solution to that particular issue that we had. And indeed, I think if you look at the event, the testimony yesterday, or the presentation yesterday, that it might have been stated that the NBPCO has decided actually to run its own infrastructure through this kind of area, obviously because it wasn't able to come to an agreement either, I would assume. But we were looking, would that have been cheaper, while we knew that the decision to take 300,000 homes out of the intervention area was going to have a huge impact on our business plan. We still kept working on it. And we were saying, well, where could we cut costs, or where could we reduce costs? And we thought one of the ways we could do this was to minimise the capital spend to get from the equipment inside the towns out as far as where the customers were in the reduced intervention area. And this is one of the ways we looked at it. Would that be right, Michael?
Okay. Can I ask you the question in terms of with the National Broadband Plan at the moment, it's still not concluded, it's a pre-tender process, and from our hearings it's clear that the developer, McGrattan McCourt, still have options in terms of how they use the last mile or the last few number of miles to a house they have the options of using the air poles, but they're publicly, or not, the department and others have said it is also possible in this final part of the tendering process that they could use the ESB poles to get access to the houses in the intervention area. Have the ESB had any discussions, ongoing further recent discussions with either the department or the developer in this case around that possibility? Have you looked?
I think my understanding is that there has been an initial request, or an initial request for discussion or whatever, I don't know, but there has been an initial contact as far as I know, but it hasn't been in any great detail. It's out there in the public that there has been an extensive agreement signed by that bidder and air for access to the air infrastructure, so their build model is on the air infrastructure. Hopping between an air infrastructure and electricity infrastructure, while it sounds simple and it sounds practical and it sounds fine, it's actually very complex and it is very expensive. The air infrastructure runs along the side of the road. The air infrastructure doesn't have any high voltage equipment on it or any dangerous electricity lines on it. The ESB equipment runs across fields, runs at the backs of houses, and isn't that always that close to the electricity, to the telecoms industry. But whatever the preferred bidder wants at the present time in terms of access to the ESB infrastructure, I would suggest that they get in contact with ESB networks as soon as possible and to sit down with them and see what the requirements are and see what's the best way to deal with that.
Okay. When you look at that Mitchelstown map, it does seem that the remaining houses are, okay, they're on roads, but they're really on the Boreen network. You're kind of, it's very much the one-off housing, which might, in a sense, if you've got a ribbon developed along a road, you can see for air just looping a fibre along your telegraph poles to a series of houses on a road is much more attractive than following a winding country road up to a Boreen. The ESB might have certain advantages when it comes to that last mile to very isolated farmhouses, because
we might, okay, you might say we might have a little advantage when you get to the last mile, but the problem we have is all the miles before the last mile, if you know what I mean, is getting to the last mile. That's the challenge.
Okay. Can I ask one last question, if I can, Chair? For Cyro, as I said, it was a brave and I think a correct investment by the ESB and Vodafone to set up Cyro. I think your analysis at the time of the digital plans of Europe and the interconnection between digital and the electricity networks is only going to enhance and become. So I think it was a brave and it seems to me successful investment in the sense that you've managed to roll out 250,000, you passed 250,000 houses, you've 40,000 customers and so on. Can you give me any sense of what comes next for Cyro?
Well, I can give you the sense that we're about halfway through phase 1, which is the business plan, which is to pass 450,000 homes, and it represents a capital expenditure of not far off 500 million euros. Between now and the end of phase 1, the shareholders will have to sit down and decide what will be phase 2, or what phase 2 will, the scope of it will encapsulate, because since we started Cyro, there has been enormous enthusiasm in the Irish telecoms industry for the rollout of fibre that was never there when we started Cyro. So we might have had an idea what phase 2 was 3 years ago. We're going to have to sit down again now and see what it is, but we would expect that there would be a phase 2. Board shareholders would be very ambitious in terms of the potential that Cyro has, in terms of what it can become in the Irish telecommunications market.
Very last question, if I can, Chair. The Department of Public Expenditure raised their concerns here, similar to the concerns that they raised in the memo for government, where they set a very unusual separate memo to the ministers. They, effect at the end of it, said that the process should be stopped and we should start where the state would engage with a state entity, I think was the word they used. They didn't specify exactly who, but that to provide a revised rollout. Air were saying yesterday that one of the reasons why they withdrew, or the difficulty, was because they'd have to set up a completely separate wholesale division and all different arrangements in their pricing and so on. If the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform had their way and there was a re-initiated process where the state was looking to manage this, similar to the way that we did the MANs, would that system you set up with Cyro, that wholesale management and the resource and expertise you've built up, would it be able to respond to the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform if it came to you looking for those resources to be used in the way that they've outlined they might want it to happen?
I'm not sure exactly, Deputy Ryan, what the actual content, what the actual question is, but like we have stopped looking at this now for 2 years, and so much has happened in 2 years. Like the technology alone that has changed in the 2 years, if you look at the huge developments in 5Gs in those 2 years, like what has happened in terms of what the regulatory structure is, what the state aid structure is, what the structure of any contract would be, what the risk with reward kind of parameters would be, where would they lie between the enterprise department, as you say, and the bidders. We've spoken earlier about the workload that ESB already has. Like the priority within ESB at the present time is to deliver on its brighter future strategy and support the government in the delivery of its climate action plan. And we would have to do a lot of thinking before we could look at any of those experiences now, Deputy.
Thank you.
Deputy O'Brien, I know you have to leave. I'm going to bring you in.
Questions. Despite the 300,000 being taken out and the donut effect, is it fair to say that the ESB infrastructure could deliver to all the remaining homes?
Well, the existing ESB infrastructure outside of the donut it goes to all the homes.
Yeah,
so the
it
infrastructure is there, Deputy O'Brien, yes.
Okay, so for the last 2 years, you haven't looked at this.
No.
For you to look at it again, would it be fair to say that the current process would have to cease and a new tendering process would have to commence?
Well, we won't be looking at it any time soon now, and there isn't any need for us to look at it. There is a piece here where we broke out ties as such with the National Broadband Plan 2 years ago. It hasn't been mentioned in ESB in those 2 years, and hasn't been mentioned, I'd say, in Vodafone in those 2 years either. And both companies are extremely busy in delivering their own business plans, Deputy O'Brien. So anything in relation to a new process or all that is really hypothetical. And as I say, so many things have changed in the 2 years since we left that, again, it's really difficult to answer any question.
Okay, that's it.
Senator Tim Lombard.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank you for your presentation, Mr. O'Leary. It's been very informative. And I think the figure that sticks out with me is the 76,000 kilometres of fibre that will be required. It's an amazing figure itself. Could I ask about the disruption? If you were to actually be involved in this, and if you were to actually go away and actually put that amount of cable on board, how much disruption would there be to the actual ESB customer then regarding that amount of work itself?
It's a good question, and it's something that we would have to sit down and plan carefully. Our intention is that no customer would suffer more than, say, two outages, 2-day outages. And we would do it in a way and approach it in a way that, in many ways, rural electrification was approached in many rural locations, and make it a kind of a community event, that this was for the community. It was a kind of a requirement that they didn't have in terms of an essential service, and we felt that we would get the support of the local people, but we would have to work very closely with the local people on the issues like that now, Mr. Lombard. But we're used to dealing with people in the outages, and we will accommodate the people who can't have the outage. There can often be, there can be a wedding, there can be a christening, there can be a Holy Communion, there can be whatever, and we will try and accommodate as much as we can with regard to those customers. But in general, we will try and do it as quickly as we can and minimise the outages for the customers.
Thank you. Regarding your engagement with AIR and the donut issue that you discussed, how many engagements did you have with AIR regarding that issue itself?
I'll pass this to Michael.
And the actual so-called plug-in method that we would have heard about yesterday, just plugging into the actual network, was that discussed? And if so, was there agreement? Were you coming to agreement? Was there a price? Was there any kind of movement regarding that issue itself?
So, first of all, I suppose we didn't really engage with AIR up until the point that the 300,000 was confirmed. And the first thing we did was we had to go and redesign our entire design. And as part of that, we looked at the option of using the AIR infrastructure with the information we had, which was a lot based on the estimations we would have in certain towns because it wasn't off the shelf. So we had a number of interventions with air, which CSIRO had over probably 2 or 3 months, but the information wasn't really forthcoming at that point. And we also engaged with Comreg and with the department to try and push that along. And we got to the point that we weren't getting sufficient engagement for us to really properly consider that in any revised proposal.
So you weren't getting the actual information from AIR, so you could put your information together to continue the bid?
I think the team that was there in AIR were trying to put together the information. They weren't, naturally, as you'd appreciate, there's Chinese walls between different parts of the organisation. So the AIR were trying to put together a team to respond to those requirements. But we started that engagement probably a lot later maybe than other parties may have, because we were utilising the ESP infrastructure up to that point. So what we were looking for versus what they were providing, there was probably a disconnect.
And without that information, it was very hard for you to continue in the actual tender process then?
With any consideration of using the air infrastructure, yes.
Okay, and there was no talk about pricing or any issues regarding that?
There was so because air is a regulated entity, there was some pricing being discussed on that, but again, it wasn't in sufficient detail for us to really factor into any proposal.
And would you have been confident that AIR would have agreed with the upgrade of the actual service over 25 years of the contract? Would you be happy that you would have got that level of agreement that if you were to plug in, that they would service it for the 25 years?
I suppose we engage on a good basis with AIR, with the expectation that they would be providing that service for whatever period of time, the 25 years of the contract, yes.
Okay. Can I ask, and Mr. Lowry, you have stated that there was a team put together within the ESB or CSIRO regarding putting together the actual tender or dealing with the actual tender itself. Could I ask, how much did it cost you to actually tender for this process? How much money have been put together? How much was the actual layout regarding these issues?
I thought I'd covered most of the questions that I thought I'd be asked here now today, but I haven't that particular one. But I could come back to you. I would say we had a team of about 10, 12 people, probably full-time, for a period of about 18 months. Would that be?
I think that's just from ESB perspective. Like, it was an overall joint team between ESB, CSIRO and Vodafone. We had a team of 75 plus for most of 2016 going into 2017. And we had a cost-sharing mechanism between both parties, so the actual costs are commercially sensitive, both with the other parties on that. But there was extensive work done from the beginning of 2015 right through to mid-2017 on that process, and we ended up mapping every house in the country.
So it's okay, fair enough. Going forward, your actual strategy, you had mentioned obviously the challenges that ESB have going forward regarding energy, regarding climate change, all those issues. Are you happy in the space that you are at the moment regarding not being involved in this actual project itself, taking into consideration the challenges that you've mentioned here regarding the amount of homes that are going to have to be brought on board, not alone the 70% renewables and everything else that's required with the new regulations that are going to come down the line with climate change?
I think we are. Like, it's not that we're totally divorced from the telecommunications business in Ireland because of the shareholders' interest in CSIRO. And as CSIRO continues to grow, and CSIRO continues to be more relevant to the people that it's serving, particularly now that we've launched a gigabit project, and you can see the kind of reaction of customers to that. And we know that we have a business that's going to grow and prosper in the telecoms business. Like, it's some kind of comfort for no longer being involved in the National Broadband Plan. And that's important to board shareholders. I can't speak to Vodafone in terms of their work programme, but I know, talking to the managers in Vodafone, that they have an extremely challenging programme in front of them, as do most of the telco operators now, in fairness. And from an ESB's perspective, while it is a very challenging work programme, it's also a very exciting time to be in ESB. Like, there is such a focus now on decarbonising the energy sector. And there is such a focus on the electrification of transport, on the electrification of heat. And we find ourselves right at the centre of the kind of key kind of deliverables that have to be managed in the state out over the next 20 to 30 years. Absolutely essential for the Irish government and the Irish state to meet its decarbonisation targets, and essential for ESB in terms of delivering on its really ambitious strategy that's laid out there in terms of the brighter future. So I would say that we have a full book, as I said earlier. We're looking out in terms of the next decade of 15 to 20 years of a huge challenging programme of work, not just in ESB networks, but in ESB generation, in our consultancy wing, in our engineering wing, and not having, if the NBP came in on top of that, we would have to sit down. It's probably not possible within the company to deliver everything. We would have to sit down and see, well, where are the priorities at that point in time? But the fact that we still have Cyron, still have an interest in Cyron C growing, continues our involvement in the telecoms market.
Okay, thank you very much. And my last question would be, we've heard yesterday that the process from the department was very onerous and very, very complex. Were you happy with your engagement with the department? Were you happy with the actual governance that you got from the department?
I would say, and we had extensive engagement with the department. Extensive engagement with the department. At all times I found the department to be very, very good to deal with. They were very open. They were very cooperative. They approached it very professionally. But as I said earlier, their interest was in protecting the state and providing the bidder with all the information there was, but that was where they were coming from, and you could sit back to one extent and say, well, maybe that's the right approach. But in terms of the engagement we had with them, even up to the very end now when we were looking for the changes in the contract and they were unwilling to accommodate us, I have to say that the relationship between Cyro, ESB and Vodafone and the department throughout the 2-year period that we met with them extensively would have been very constructive and very good relationship.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Leary.
Thank you, Senator Leyden.
First of all, I'd like to welcome Mr. Stanley and Michael Mann and your colleagues. And I think it's been a worthwhile exercise, the fact that you decided to come in. You were reluctant to come in initially.
Well, the reluctance was really in the fact that we had withdrawn from the process with 2 years,
yes,
and we hadn't put in a bid, so we weren't really in the process. That was all.
I think it's still also very useful with the information, the public are entitled to information and to know exactly what was going on behind the scene, because there seemed to be a feeling that there was some sort of preference for the Graham and McCrourt type approach. However, they were so influential to be able to persuade the government to potentially award them a contract when they don't own one piece of fibre or one pole. Now, I think that's quite extraordinary, quite frankly, when we have a semi-state company with a proven track record, have accounts in every house in Ireland. The accounting system would be so simplified to actually extend it to fibre. It would make it quite manageable within your ability to do that. Now, when I was in the Department of Trade and Marketing, I was out in Kuala Lumpur with ESB International, and you were going out to Malaysia and the Middle East, getting fantastic contracts, employing over 750 people, top technicians. I was very impressed by your work there. You put in the whole account system in Malaysia for the government. And yet here, under your own, in your country, as a semi-state company, that you couldn't have come to some terms to ensure that the ESB would have got the contract, such a lucrative contract, because at the end of the day, if you made money on that, dividend would be coming back to the state. So my point of view, if it's a win-win situation, this present proposal, costing up to $3 billion, is a lose-lose-lose position, because they're going to own it in 25 years, the state won't own a piece of it, and we don't know the cost per individual, we don't know the cost of the subsidy. I'd have far more faith, and say, I'm lucky I have privilege here, which is brilliant, I'd have far more faith in the ESB to do a job on behalf of the state than I would have on American companies that come in, and they're only venture capitals. I don't know how they're going to get the wires around without working with ESB or AIR, because they have no structure, they have no physical structure. So I just think, from my point of view, why would you walk away in September 2017 and yet you're out abroad putting in massive investments all over the world and making money? It surprised me. I can't understand it.
Well, as I said before, I can't make any comment on the bids of either McGrath Court or Ayr. In terms of ourselves, we just found ourselves in a position, following Ayr's decision to commercially connect and run high-speed broadband into 300,000 homes. It totally changed the risk profile of the contract. It totally changed the structure of the contract. And as I said earlier, and I want to say again, I'm not suggesting there was anything wrong whatsoever in what they did. They were technically entitled to do it. But it did have a dramatic impact on the potential revenues for the business. And that, with some other issues within the contract, meant that the shareholders, both ESB and Vodafone, were no longer willing to continue funding the kind of team that were putting together the bid. And that was kind of the simple reason why a decision was taken to withdraw.
Now, just on a kind of historical point of view, when I was in the Department of Post Telegraphs a long time ago, I was trying to bring telephones into rural areas, and which at that time Telecom Éireann was under the Department of Post Telegraphs. I tried to come up with a suggestion that they use the ESB network to bring wires down rural areas, but that was turned down. It was technically not possible. How did it become technically possible to put fibre optics onto poles and bring them to rural areas? It wasn't technically possible to put telephone wires back in 1982.
Michael?
Senator, I think when we look at telecommunications infrastructure in the past, it was all based on copper. The copper conducts electricity.
Yes, that's right.
And there's a significant risk there that it interferes with the network and creates potential risks, and you potentially bring that risk into somebody's house. So there had to be separation between the two. With the evolution of fibre technology and overhead fibre technology that you can string on poles, it's non-conductive.
It's not conductive of electricity.
Electricity. So it becomes much safer, and that evolution has changed. So that's where ESB, like other companies, considered using fibre on its infrastructure, and we've been doing that for the last 20 years with success. And just in terms of the your previous comment in terms of the process, what I would say is the department went to enormous lengths, and credit to them, to ensure that there was a correct process set out from the very start, which ensured that only very competent bidders got through the pre-qualification process that had the technical, commercial capability to deliver on the end project. Things might have changed for us in terms of that process, but the department followed a process right from the very start in December 2015 to probably the point that they're in today, and they have made certain.
But
There is interfering with the sound system.
Just want to say,
yeah, very briefly.
Thank you for that clarification. I felt at the time that if the wires were actually insulated adequately, that they wouldn't conduct and they wouldn't have access to electricity. But you're making a good point. Fibre optic does not do that. But now what's happening at the moment, through the chair, is that I live in a rural area, and we've now installed Imagine, I think it's called. So they're now supplying quite a good service to our house. It's adequate for our needs at the moment. I would prefer to have electricity, ESB, bringing the fibre into my house directly, not by radio signals. I prefer the actual wire and coming in. And I just think it's tragedy, I think. My view is that the Electricity Supply Board, our company, is not carrying out this. And I hope somebody will have the sense of government to look at the whole situation again, and quickly. Thank you.
Briefly on that, I'm going to go to Deputy Sherlock. Yeah, Deputy Sherlock.
Thank you, Chair. I'm the last person standing, so and a lot of my questions have been clarified, so I won't detain you, Chair, or the people who've come before us today, but just accept to say thank you. It's been a very clear-headed, lucid presentation. I think it's gone a long way towards helping my understanding, certainly, especially in terms of the timelines, and I think that was a very good idea to give us the timelines in respect of your involvement in the National Broadband Plan. And I think there's a very clear message from yourselves now that that was 2 years ago, and you're talking about the future. I think that's a very unambiguous message. Having said that, if I can just detain you for a while longer, just to help my own understanding in respect of the engagement with the department up to the point in September 2017 where CSIRO withdraws from the process. I'm trying to project myself inside in the room where CSIRO is engaging with the department, and after you've carried out the mapping exercise and you've done the revised intervention area. At what point did you actually conclude, or how did it come about that you concluded, look, this is it, we're out, game over, we're finished with this? Is it because, as you've stated earlier, that the revenue reduction would be such that it would just make it untenable, or was there any profit or return on investment that you could say, even with the 542, we could still keep going with this process? I'm trying to understand, I suppose, and I'm not putting it across very clearly, what would it have taken for CSIRO to have stayed in the game? That's the kernel of my question, really. I know you make the point, Mr. O'Leary, that, okay, and you've stated, and I quote, it would also have led to a much bigger reduction in revenue. Thus, our overall potential target revenues were significantly reduced also. Right? So you state that, and you also outlined, and it's good to see that you've gone fairly close to home for me anyway when you articulate the Mitchelstown example and the donut effect, But I'm trying to understand, at what point do you say, that's it, we're gone? We've had the engagement, you state it's been a positive engagement with the department, but there must have been an articulation from my perspective looking at this where you've said, you've just given 300,000 homes or connections to another entity, or they've come in and they've said that they're going to do it. What is it that makes it commercially viable for us to do it now? That's what I still can't fully grapple. I found, I thought it was if I can say this, and again it's a personal comment, I thought it was a pity that CSIRO pulled out because of your reputation and international reputation, which has been articulated earlier, and your ability to get projects done in a very seamless fashion and do it very quickly. That's why there was a certain amount of disappointment.
If I may, it probably just wasn't any one issue, and the level of discussion and interaction we had with the department was pretty intensive around the summer of 2017. I suppose we were looking for everything to change. We had a list of things that we'd like to have seen happening, but the department did remind us, look, you are in the middle of a procurement process that has opened and is ongoing and is due to close, and they weren't really in a position to accommodate the list of requests that we had, which we felt
but that's what I can't understand,
were reasonable because of the fact that they were actually in a process. So it isn't any one thing. There's no doubt that the change in the intervention area from 850,000 down to 550,000 was a very significant development. As I said, that was just a commercial decision, so it's fine. And the other changes that we wanted, we were still trying to make a business case, but following a lot of discussions and being advised by the department that they could go a bit of the way, but they couldn't go the whole way, the shareholders made a decision. We had been at this process for 2 years, and it wasn't looking like that we were going to get to a position of a business case that could be supported by both shareholders. And the costs that were being accrued in staying with the process were not insignificant, and they were continued to grow. And you'll bear those costs if you're looking out and you see something positive in the horizon. But when those costs are mounting up and you're looking out and you see that this is getting more difficult and more challenging, then a decision was taken, right, we're going no further.
Michael Mann, do you want to come in?
We spent 2.5 years up until that point. A huge team, spending a lot of time and effort, personal time and effort as well, commitment to the project to try and make it work. But you get to a point where, as Dennis said, it just doesn't stack up. Mitchelstown is a perfect example, because when you look at the challenge in that, and it's not just one Mitchelstown, there's 800 Mitchelstowns around Ireland, and you put all of those together, and it just, and no matter what you do, and we engaged and we had great discussions with the department on it, but we were looking for one thing, whether the other bidders were looking for that or not, the department had to maintain a particular line, and in fairness to them, they were very clear on that. There were other issues that were worked through with us, probably of interest to all bidders, and it was a very fair process.
You see, what I can't reconcile is that there was a de facto change in the process, because the tender process was designed to deliver X number. The numbers changed. They were reduced because somebody came in. So I would have thought in my mind's eye there was a clear justification for everybody to sit down at that juncture, all of the potential bidders, to say, well, you've changed the entirety of this process, and therefore the terms on which we are now coming in are reasonable because of those material changes. What I can't reconcile in my own mind, I suppose, is the justification of that the department uses to say that you're in the middle of a tender process, and therefore, there are strictures in what can be said and so on. So, and that's just a point I'm raising. But if I just go to the future and talk about CSIRO and talk about the current rollout, the 242,000 homes that are passed, they have the potential to be, by virtue of the fact that they're passed, they have the potential to be enabled.
Well, that's what we mean by homes that are passed, that homes that can be connected by a drop from a fibre cable that is either running underground outside the person's home or overhead outside the person's home.
Okay, and you're at 42,000?
We're at 42,000 customers connected.
Okay, have you a metric on the cost per house, roughly?
In terms of cost per home pass, I don't have that figure with me now, but I can get it with you. But those, sorry?
It's commercially probably sensitive.
Yeah,
No, that's fine. If it's commercially sensitive, I appreciate that as well. Okay, but your aim is 450,000.
That's what the business plan is in what was phase one. That was supported by funding of not far of 500 million euros, 450 million euros by both shareholders. And that's the level of the commitment they're making to the business at the present time. There's about 2 years of that business plan left to run now, Deputy Sherlock. And when that has run, and we've reached that, at the end of that, the shareholders will then sit down and say, well, what is the future for CSIRO? How can we grow this business further? And where can we get additional customers? As I say, when we looked at this 3 years ago, we were looking out at a totally different landscape to what we're looking out now. So we just have to do a bit of thinking on that. But I know that board shareholders are hugely supportive of the CSIRO model, of the CSIRO business, and really want to see it grow.
And you've said that, and I absolutely have internalised that, because you've said it in the earlier interventions. I suppose, again, where I'm coming from here is that if I have my constituent, for instance, who is supposedly encapsulated within the 300,000 provided by AIR, but is the last house on the link and is waiting 3 months and then 3 months and 3 months, and is, in one particular case, is put out to Never Never Land, is there the potential downstream as part of the 450,000 where you're rolling out, an infrastructure that person could conceivably be served in that offering?
It would depend where that person is in relation to the last person we would have served under phase one. If that person is a next door neighbour of the last person we've served in phase one, then it's highly probable he will be a CSIRO customer. But unfortunately, if that customer is 3 kilometres or 4 kilometres away from the last customer we've served in phase one, then that's not the type of customer that CSIRO would be going to. That is a customer that's more suitable to be in one of the intervention areas in the National Broadband Plan, and that was the purpose of the National Broadband Plan.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And just final question, I don't think it was covered. I know there was, again, a lot of mention of ESB doing this, and these are all hypothetical questions, but just for clarity, if we were to roll out a contract like this again with, and it was to be given to ESB, we know the issues around state aid rules, could you just clarify that a new procurement process would have to be gone through, and just if you could have an idea of the time frame in relation to how long that procurement process would take.
It's really difficult to answer that question, and that's more a question really for the department, because anything to do with state aid or state aid clearance is managed 100% by the department, and ESB have no involvement in it whatsoever. Like, it is the state getting clearance to do an intervention for a particular reason. So that is a process. I'm not an expert in state aid, but I do know it is a very time-consuming process. And it adds time. Then you have to get into a procurement process. That adds time. You have to appoint contractors. That adds time. And you're adding time all the time before you actually get to a period where you can build out the infrastructure. So without knowing the first timeline, the difficult timeline, it's really very, very difficult to answer the question like that.
We had a statement here from KPMG who gave a figure of it would take 5 years, because we'd have to, if you ended this process, started all over again, the procurement process. But I suppose in general, you're saying that it will take time. It's not going to happen within a year or two, as some have said. Yeah. Thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming before us this afternoon and being so open in your answering, and we appreciate the fact that you're now outside this process, and we really value your contribution that has really helped us in our analysis. So on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank Mr O'Leary and Mr Mahon for coming before us today, and the joint committee now stands adjourned until 5 p.m. on the 2nd of July. Thank you.